Hello, everyone. So today, I'm going to take you on a little trip. Not by plane, not by boat, but straight into the deserts of ancient Egypt. Can you imagine the golden sands stretching forever, the pyramids shining like giant stairways to the sky, and temples filled with stories carved into stone? It's like stepping into a world of magic and mystery. When we talk about the pharaohs, we're really talking about legends. These were not just kings and queens, but people who were seen as chosen by the gods themselves. Whole dynasties were born with dreams of keeping their kingdom safe, their people strong, and their names remembered forever. The birth of a dynasty was never just about one crown or one throne. It was about new beginnings, fresh hope, and sometimes even a little drama, maybe a lot of drama. Every new ruler carried the weight of history, as if the stars themselves had whispered, "It's your turn now." And let's not forget the treasures. Oh my gosh, the treasures. Glittering gold, shining jewels, delicate statues. Not just pretty things, but symbols of power, life, and eternity. Even today, people travel from all over the world just to see a glimpse of what those pharaohs left behind. But maybe the most magical part isn't the gold or the temples. It's the stories that survived thousands of years, written in hieroglyphs, waiting for us to read them like secrets from the past. A dynasty wasn't just about ruling, it was about creating a legend that would live forever. So when we say legends of the pharaohs, it's not just history. It's the birth of something bigger, a dream that still makes our hearts race thousands of years later. Thank you. When we imagine the golden sands and timeless pyramids of ancient Egypt, we step into a world that feels both distant and yet strangely close, as though the desert winds still carry whispers from thousands of years ago. The golden sands stretched endlessly under a blazing sun, creating a landscape that looked like it had been painted by the gods themselves. For travelers in the ancient world, approaching Egypt must have felt like walking into a dream. Endless dunes that shimmered like fire during the day, and at night, a sea of stars so bright that it felt as if the sky had lowered itself to touch the earth. These sands were not just empty wastelands. They were protectors of secrets, guardians of tombs, and the keepers of entire civilizations buried beneath their surface. The pyramids, rising proudly against this backdrop of sand and sky, were not simply buildings. They were monuments of eternity. Imagine the effort, the vision, and the strength required to place stone upon stone, thousands of them, until the structure pierced the heavens. To the people of Egypt, the pyramids were more than tombs. They were stairways to the afterlife, eternal homes where rulers could journey into the world beyond. Even today, when we look at them, we can hardly believe human hands managed to build such giants with nothing but simple tools and sheer determination. Each block of stone tells a silent story of workers, architects, and dreamers who wanted to create something that would outlive them all. The golden sands around these pyramids added to their mystery. Wind would sweep across the desert, covering and uncovering hidden paths, shifting dunes, and sometimes even swallowing whole cities over centuries. The desert itself became a natural protector, wrapping the monuments in silence and solitude. For the ancient Egyptians, this land was sacred. The desert was not only a place of danger and harshness, but also a place of purity, separating the world of the living from the world of the dead. To cross its sands was to step closer to the divine, closer to mystery, closer to the eternal. Standing before a pyramid, imagine how a young child of ancient Egypt must have felt. Perhaps they looked up in wonder, seeing the stones glowing gold under the sun, their edges sharp, their symmetry perfect. The desert heat would shimmer all around, and the pyramid itself might have seemed alive, as if it were breathing with the desert air. For people then, these structures were not just part of the land. They were part of their identity, symbols of pride, faith, and continuity. Every grain of sand seemed to belong to history. Every shadow cast by the pyramids felt like a reminder of time stretching endlessly. And yet the sands and pyramids together created a paradox. The desert was constantly changing, shifting, restless, while the pyramids stood still, unyielding, eternal. It was like the dance of time itself, the fragile sands moving in waves and the pyramids standing firm as anchors of forever. That balance is part of what made ancient Egypt feel so otherworldly. It was a place where eternity and impermanence lived side by side, where every sunrise brought both new life and the reminder of the past. Travelers and traders who came across the golden sands must have felt both awe and fear. The desert could swallow a caravan without mercy, yet it could also reveal breathtaking sight: temples carved in stone, statues rising from nowhere, and pyramids that seemed to shine with a light of their own. The sands gave nothing easily, but they guarded treasures for those determined enough to seek them. For ancient Egyptians, this was not just geography, it was destiny. Their lives were shaped by the Nile, yes, but their sense of eternity was shaped by the desert and its golden guardians. The pyramids themselves changed over time. When they were first built, many were covered in smooth limestone casing stones, gleaming in the sunlight so brightly they could be seen for miles. They were like mirrors reflecting the sun's rays, almost blinding in their brilliance. Imagine sailing down the Nile and catching sight of one of these shining monuments. It must have felt like seeing a piece of the heavens resting on earth. The desert around them would glow with their reflection, making the golden sands even richer in color. It was a landscape designed to impress not only humans, but the gods. The timelessness of this scenery is what still captures our imagination today. The sands may shift, and the stones may crumble, but the pyramids remain, eternal against the horizon. They stand as reminders that human beings, even thousands of years ago, longed for permanence, for beauty, for a way to touch eternity. The golden sands will always move, swirling and dancing with the wind, but the pyramids remain, rooted in the desert as proof that some dreams really can last forever. Pharaohs in ancient Egypt were not just rulers sitting on thrones and giving commands. They were seen as something far greater. To their people, a pharaoh was not merely a human being but a living god, chosen by the divine to keep harmony in the land. This belief was woven into every part of life, from the way laws were made to the way temples were built, from the songs sung in the marketplaces to the rituals performed at dawn and dusk. The pharaoh was the beating heart of Egypt, a link between earth and the heavens, carrying the weight of an entire civilization's faith and destiny on their shoulders. In the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, the gods were everywhere, in the Nile that gave life, in the sun that rose faithfully each morning, in the winds that blew across the desert. But the gods were distant too, mighty and powerful, and it was the pharaoh who stood as the bridge between them and ordinary people. To worship the pharaoh was to honor the gods. To obey the pharaoh's words was to follow divine law. Every decision, from the planting of crops to the building of monuments, carried sacred weight because it was believed to be guided by the will of the gods through their chosen ruler. The image of the pharaoh was carefully shaped to reflect this divine connection. Crowns, jewelry, and garments were not simply decorative but filled with symbolism. The tall white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, when joined together, represented the unification of the land under divine authority. The crook and flail held across the chest were not just symbols of power, but of care and discipline, showing the pharaoh as both shepherd and protector of the people. Even the cobra on the forehead, known as the uraeus, was a sign that the gods themselves guarded the ruler, striking down enemies with divine fire. Every detail, every emblem, was a reminder that the pharaoh was more than mortal. Daily life in Egypt reflected this belief. In temples, priests did not pray directly to the gods on behalf of the people, but through rituals that centered on the pharaoh's name and authority. Hymns and carvings praised the ruler as the chosen one of the sun god, the beloved of the creator, the bringer of balance to the land. When people looked up at the great statues, towering so high that one could barely see their faces, they were reminded that their ruler was larger than life, not just a king or queen, but a sacred presence walking the earth. This belief also shaped the responsibilities of the throne. Being seen as divine did not mean an easy life of luxury. It meant endless duty. The pharaoh had to protect Egypt from enemies, ensure that the Nile's floods were properly honored through rituals, and maintain the balance of order, truth, and harmony. If chaos or famine struck, people feared that the link between the gods and the land was broken. The weight of this expectation was immense, and it pushed pharaohs to build monuments, temples, and tombs that would prove their devotion not only in life, but also in death. The divine image of the pharaoh extended beyond their own lifetime. Death did not end their role but transformed it. A pharaoh was believed to join the gods, becoming a star in the night sky or taking their place alongside deities in the eternal cycle of life. Their tombs were not simply graves but gateways to the afterlife, built to ensure their safe journey and eternal rule in the world beyond. The people left offerings, whispered prayers, and believed that their ruler's spirit continued to watch over them, guiding Egypt from the unseen realm just as they had guided it in life. This powerful image of pharaohs as divine rulers created unity and identity across generations. Even as different dynasties rose and fell, the core idea remained unchanged. Egypt was not just ruled by humans but blessed by gods who walked among them. It was this belief that gave the civilization its strength, its ambition, and its resilience. Without it, the pyramids might never have been built. The temples might never have been carved, and the golden age of ancient Egypt might never have flourished the way it did. The vision of the pharaoh as divine has continued to fascinate the world long after the sands buried their monuments and time weathered their statues. The idea that a person could embody the will of the gods, could be both mortal and divine, still stirs wonder, making the legends of the pharaohs timeless in ways that go beyond stone, gold, or hieroglyphs. The birth of dynasties in ancient Egypt was never just a change of rulers, it was beginning of new hope, new visions, and sometimes the spark of transformations that would shape the future of the entire kingdom. Each dynasty carried with it the weight of the past, but also the promise of something fresh. When one line of rulers ended and another began, it was as if the gods themselves had opened a new chapter in the great story of Egypt. The people looked to these moments with anticipation, wondering what the new reign would bring, whether peace or conquest, wealth or hardship, but always with faith that the divine order of the world was being renewed. The rise of a dynasty was not simply about inheritance of a crown, though succession often played a central role. It was about continuity and legitimacy, the sacred assurance that the ruler was chosen and supported by the gods. The rituals surrounding the enthronement were designed to show that this was not just a political change, but a cosmic event. When a new ruler took the throne, ceremonies bound them to the land, to the Nile, and to the eternal cycle of life and death that governed Egyptian belief. The gods were invoked, priests performed rituals, and the people celebrated as if the very foundations of the universe were being secured once again. Every dynasty came with its own ambitions, and these were written into stone, gold, and papyrus. New rulers wanted to leave their mark, to show that their time was destined for greatness. Some did this by expanding the borders of Egypt through war, ensuring that their dynasty would be remembered as conquerors. Others focused on peace and prosperity, strengthening the economy, opening trade routes, and filling granaries so that famine would not trouble their people. There were rulers who sought immortality through art and architecture, raising temples and monuments so magnificent that their names would echo across the ages. Each choice was a reflection of what they wanted their dynasty to symbolize, and in every case, it was about bringing new hope to the land. The people of Egypt understood dynasties as more than politics. They saw them as cycles of renewal. When one dynasty faded, often after years of decline, corruption, or external threats, the next was expected to restore balance and order. This was not just a matter of ruling effectively, but of embodying Ma'at, the principle of truth, harmony, and justice that the universe depended upon. A new dynasty was a chance to realign the kingdom with the divine, to correct what had gone wrong, and to begin again with strength and purpose. Even when the transition came through struggle or bloodshed, The eventual victory was framed as destiny fulfilled, as though the gods had chosen the right family to restore balance. Dynastic birth was also about identity. Each new line of rulers brought a unique character to Egypt, a style of art, a way of building, a particular focus on certain gods or traditions. One dynasty might elevate the worship of a specific deity, building temples in their honor and spreading their cult across the land. Another might emphasize military power, commissioning grand reliefs of battles and victories to show the might of Egypt to both its own people and to the outside world. These differences did not erase what came before but layered upon it, creating a tapestry of history where each dynasty contributed its own colors and shapes. For the common people, the birth of a dynasty could feel like a dawn after a long night. They hoped for fairer laws, for abundant harvests, for stability that would keep their families safe. The promises of new rulers were carried through proclamations and celebrated in festivals where songs, dances, and offerings filled the air. Markets bustled with energy, temples resounded with hymns, and children grew up learning the names of new leaders who would shape their world. In these moments, the entire society was reminded of its resilience, its ability to endure and renew itself through change. Even in times of uncertainty, when rival claims and conflicts threatened to tear the land apart, the eventual establishment of a dynasty brought a sense of relief. The chaos of transition would settle, and once again Egypt would have a figure to embody its unity, a ruler to anchor its hopes. Dynasties were not only about the rulers themselves, but about the promise of continuity, the assurance that Egypt would go on, generation after generation, guided by the blessings of the gods and the strength of its leaders. The birth of a dynasty was thus more than a political milestone, it was a spiritual rebirth for the nation. It tied together the land, the people, and the divine in a bond that renewed the identity of Egypt itself. Through these cycles, the civilization endured for millennia, with each dynasty adding its own legend to the eternal story written in the golden sands and carved into the timeless stones of temples and monuments. The treasures of ancient Egypt were never simply ornaments or luxuries. They were powerful symbols of eternity, strength, and the connection between the divine and mortal worlds. Every piece of gold, every jewel, every carefully crafted statue carried meaning far beyond its physical beauty. These objects were seen as embodiments of life itself, channels of protection, and guarantees of immortality. To the people who created and cherished them, treasures were not only possessions but sacred tools that preserved the order of the universe and ensured that the soul would continue its journey beyond death. Gold was perhaps the most important of all, not because it was rare but because it was eternal. Unlike other metals, it did not tarnish or decay, and this unchanging quality made it the perfect symbol of the divine. Egyptians believed that the flesh of the gods was made of gold, so to surround a ruler with golden objects was to bring them closer to the eternal. Golden masks, jewelry, and furniture were designed not only to display wealth, but to protect the pharaoh's spirit and to affirm their divine status. The gleam of gold in the light of torches or the desert sun was like the radiance of the sun god himself, a glow that promised immortality and strength. Jewels carried their own meanings. Carnelian, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and other stones were chosen not only for their beauty, but for the powers they were believed to hold. Lapis, with its deep blue hue, symbolized the heavens and offered protection from evil. Carnelian, with its fiery red tones, represented energy and vitality. Turquoise brought joy and safety, often associated with rebirth and fertility. Necklaces, rings, and amulets embedded with these stones were worn as shields against danger, charms for prosperity, and blessings for eternal life. Every piece was created with purpose, crafted to serve both in the world of the living and in the eternal world of the dead. Statues and figurines were also treasured as guardians and servants for the afterlife. Small carved figures, known as shabdis, were placed in tombs with the belief that they would come to life in the next world, ready to work in place of the deceased. These treasures were not gifts of leisure, but tools of survival for eternity. Larger statues represented gods, rulers, or protective spirits, and their presence in tombs and temples created a sense of divine companionship. Through these treasures, the ruler or individual was never alone but surrounded by guardians who would ensure their safe passage. Furniture and everyday items, when crafted as treasures, reflected the desire to make eternity comfortable. Thrones inlaid with gold, beds decorated with sacred symbols, chests filled with clothing and perfumes were placed in tombs so that the afterlife would mirror the beauty of earthly life. Even mundane objects became treasures when imbued with religious meaning. A comb, a jar, a chair all carried inscriptions and images meant to protect and bless the owner as they moved from life to death. These items were treasures not just because of their value, but because of the care and hope placed into their creation. Treasures also carried the weight of political strength. To display gold, jewels, and magnificent objects was to show the power of Egypt itself, its control over resources, and its favor from the gods. Foreign visitors who saw the wealth of temples and palaces were meant to understand the might of Egypt, a land so rich that even eternity seemed filled with splendor. Treasures became symbols of authority, reminding both subjects and rivals that the ruler was more than mortal, blessed with the favor of divine forces, and capable of commanding the wealth of the earth. The treasures buried with rulers were never chosen randomly. Priests, artisans, and family members carefully selected objects that reflected the journey of the soul. Amulets in the shapes of sacred animals, such as scarabs and falcons, were placed on the body to guide and protect. Sacred texts were written on papyrus rolls and stored among the treasures to provide instructions for the challenges of the afterlife. Even the positioning of objects in a tomb followed ritual patterns, each step designed to reflect harmony with the universe. These treasures told a story of faith, culture, and the eternal search for immortality. The treasures were also closely linked to the idea of strength. Strength in ancient Egypt was not measured only in armies or weapons, but in the ability to endure beyond death. A ruler who surrounded themselves with treasures demonstrated their confidence in their eternal rule. To build a tomb filled with gold and jewels was to declare that their power would not end with their last breath, but would continue into the next world. This was not arrogance but a cultural necessity, a way to ensure that the balance of Mat, the cosmic order, was never broken. The treasures of Egypt, carefully hidden within tombs and temples, often remained untouched for centuries, waiting beneath the shifting sands. They were placed not for the eyes of the living, but for the needs of the dead and the will of the gods. Yet when they were discovered thousands of years later, their brilliance still carried the same message. Wealth fades in the hands of mortals, but symbols of eternity shine forever. Stories and hieroglyphs were the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, a way of ensuring that the voices of the past would never fade. They were not merely decorations carved on stone walls or written on papyrus scrolls, but powerful vessels of memory, transmitting beliefs, achievements, and dreams across thousands of years. To the Egyptians, writing was a gift from the gods, a sacred invention that allowed them to communicate with the divine, honor their rulers, and keep their history alive. Each symbol carried weight, each line was infused with meaning, and every story told through these hieroglyphs added another layer to the legacy of the pharaohs and their people. Hieroglyphs were not an ordinary alphabet, but a complex system of pictures that combined art with language. Some signs stood for sounds, others for ideas, and many for entire words, creating a script that was both beautiful and precise. To read them was to enter into a world of symbols where birds, eyes, waves, and hands spoke together in harmony. Temples, tombs, and monuments were covered with these writings, making the walls themselves speak. A person standing before them could feel as though they were surrounded by voices echoing through stone, voices that belonged to priests, kings, and gods. The Egyptians believed that writing had magical power. To inscribe a name was to make it live forever. To carve a story was to ensure it would never be forgotten. That is why names of rulers were placed inside cartouches, oval shapes that acted like protective shields. As long as the name remained visible, the ruler's spirit endured in both the world of the living and the afterlife. Stories carved into walls did more than describe events. They transformed them into eternal truths. Victories in battle, offerings to gods, festivals, and rituals all became immortal once recorded in hieroglyphs, preserved for all eternity. These writings were often accompanied by illustrations that made the stories come alive. Bright colors were painted onto the carvings so that gods appeared radiant, rulers looked eternal, and symbols glowed with divine energy. A single wall could hold entire histories, scenes of battles fought, processions of priests carrying offerings, families gathering to celebrate harvests, and rituals ensuring the rising of the Nile. Every image worked together with the hieroglyphs, so the viewer was not just reading, but experiencing the story as though it were unfolding in front of them. For the Egyptians, stories were more than entertainment. They were guides to life, faith, and eternity. Tales of creation explained how the gods shaped the world out of chaos, giving order and balance. Myths of gods and goddesses reflected the struggles of nature, love, death, and rebirth. Legends of rulers reminded people of their greatness and inspired loyalty. These stories were repeated in festivals, songs, and rituals, but hieroglyphs gave them permanence. Once inscribed, they were no longer fleeting words in the air. They became eternal wisdom carved into stone. The walls of tombs were filled with stories meant to help the dead navigate the afterlife. Sacred texts, such as the spells from the Book of the Dead, were written in hieroglyphs to guide the soul through challenges and trials. Instructions for crossing rivers, facing divine judges, and entering the realm of the gods were placed beside the body, ensuring the spirit would never be lost. Every spell, every charm, every illustration was a story of survival and hope, offering the dead the same strength that stories had given the living. Stories and hieroglyphs also connected people to their gods. Hymns written on temple walls praised the sun god, the river, and the spirits that protected the land. Ritual instructions inscribed in sacred places allowed priests to perform ceremonies exactly as intended by tradition. In this way, writing preserved the bond between humans and the divine, making sure that no matter how many generations passed, the words would still guide worship and devotion. These carvings were not hidden for only a few to see. They were part of the landscape of daily life. A traveler walking past a temple or statue would see inscriptions that told stories of glory and devotion. An ordinary person entering a shrine might read, or hear a priest read aloud, the words that carried blessings for the community. In this way, hieroglyphs and stories were woven into the fabric of existence, shaping how people saw themselves and their world. What is remarkable is how these ancient voices endured even when the language itself was forgotten. For centuries, the ability to read hieroglyphs was lost, leaving the stories silent. Yet the carvings remained, waiting patiently for someone to unlock their secrets. When they were finally deciphered in modern times, the stories of ancient Egypt came alive again, proving the power of writing to cross even the greatest distances of time. Through stories and hieroglyphs, the Egyptians gave themselves eternity. They spoke not only to their own people, but to all who would come after, ensuring that their faith, their rulers, their struggles, and their dreams would never vanish. The walls still speak, the papyrus still whispers, and the golden sands still echo with the voices that hieroglyphs preserved, carrying the legends of the pharaohs far beyond their own age.